fundraising barely ever goes faster than you think it will.
Do you have budget constraints? Do you have milestones that you need to hit? Do you have an animal study scheduled for next month that you need prototypes for?
Some founders, especially if they're the ones that are in charge of fundraising, like they don't want to tell people that they're struggling fundraising.
Buying components and sub-assemblies from Chamfer or other off-the-shelf components and retrofitting them to make it work for what you're trying to do.
You really don't want the cheapest price usually. They're cutting corners somewhere.
Sure that you ask questions and dig deep around their experience and their capabilities and their expertise.
Oh, I figured out I need to change this thing.
I have one more hot topic, actually.
Let's go. Let's go. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on today's episode of the XO Medtech Innovation Podcast. I'm Spencer, founder at XO Medtech. Today we have with us Sam Wagner. She's a business development manager at Medical Murray. Prior to becoming that business development manager, she was an R&D engineer, before transitioning into that strategic business development role. So she really knows the ins and outs of complex medical device development and how to get these devices to market. So with that, Sam, welcome to the pod.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited.
Yeah. So one reason I'm really excited to have you on the pod today is, with the work that you've done, throughout your career, but also at Medical Murray, working with new clients, kind of going through that RFQ process, you really live on a side of the curtain that a lot of founders, it's like a black box, right? They really just don't get to peek behind, the curtain there. And one thing that I think is super important, but it's hard for new founders to get right, is kind of making sure that they're prepared for that RFQ process. So maybe we'll just start there, for the first question, kind of what are some key steps or readiness essentials, right, for founders to have when they're initiating that request for quote, or the RFQ process with contract development and device manufacturing organizations?
Yeah, for sure. I think it kind of depends on the stage you're in, right? If you're coming more on the design side of things, the manufacturing side of things, there's going to be different requirements. But regardless, I think there's some readiness essentials to both the development or technology side and the business side of things. I think a lot of times founders overlook the business side of things, communicating that with their CDMO. But that's super important for us to know too, and really kind of sets up that partnership for success when you communicate both the technology side and the business side. So, like communicating your state of technology is the first step. I think a lot of times founders may not really understand exactly where their state of technology is. They know they need prototypes, but they're not necessarily sure how to communicate the level of prototypes they need, whether it's just a prototype that they're going to use for fundraising efforts or a prototype that they're going to use in an acute animal study, or maybe, they've done that and the next step is their first in-man study. So I think, really communicating and understanding what level of prototypes you're looking for, your state of technology, I think that's a really important factor kind of going into the RFQ process.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, one thing people forget, it's like you guys are running a business and you really care about what this product's going to do. So having forecasted volumes and like when you're going to go to market and kind of even like, do you have funding, right? Like, can you afford to pay for someone to do all of this work? I've seen people like get like flummoxed when they get asked that question, like, hey, do you have like annual forecasts and volumes that we can expect?
Yeah.
You hit on another thing that I think a lot of founders, they'll think like, okay, I'm just going to go get this made and the prototype we make is going to work. And then we're going to go straight into, they're basically immediately reaching design freeze and then kind of going through there. I'm curious, when you guys are quoting projects, especially when they're coming in a little bit earlier and there's a fair amount of development work that you're assessing will be done for the project, do you try to bake in or maybe talk to them and kind of work into the quote like, hey, like the chances of you getting it right on the first prototype with us is very slim and it has nothing to do with us. That's just how the process works. Do you kind of think about that? Do you work that in?
Yeah, we do. Absolutely. And sometimes that is hard to communicate because first-time founders definitely don't know how that works and how many iterations you'll have to go through before you truly reach that design freeze. And after you reach design freeze, you may still get some more clinical evidence that you want to change the design for some reason or another. So we do try to build that in. It's super hard to predict, obviously. You don't know how many iterations it's going to take or what the changes are going to be. It could be significant changes or it could be minor modifications. So sometimes we'll give a broad range of, this TBD phase of iterations or design iterations. And sometimes there's a broad estimate to it, and sometimes it's just a giant TBD.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things too, and that's I mean I think every single podcast I've been harping on customer discovery, but like it's so funny, they'll get deeper into it and they'll meet potential customers. Maybe they go to a conference and then they'll come back and like, well, I figured out I need to change this thing, I need to do this thing, I need a surface treatment, I need to be this different material, and it's always funny how they think they can skip out on that work, but it always comes back to get them right.
Yeah. Yep.
One thing you also mentioned was kind of that relationship between development and then, contract manufacturing. And I'd even throw there's kind of a prototyping step, right? Obviously in there, in between those things. So lots of different groups, lots of different flavors that are doing this type of work. You'll see some that only do development. You'll see some that only do prototypes, some that only do contract manufacturing, and then some that do all three. I know Medical Murray does it pretty full service, cradle to grave. I personally think certain projects that is perfect for, right? Having one partner doing cradle to grave kind of everything. For other projects, right, it can be more difficult to do that. And specifically kind of the development versus, kind of doing both development and contract manufacturing with one group. Open-ended question, kind of what are your thoughts on that? How do you parse the development versus contract manufacturing?
Yeah, for sure. I think we are a bit unique because our business is really split 50-50 between development and manufacturing. And I think that's becoming less common, and groups are focusing more on one or the other. I think it depends on your technology. We are really focused and specialized in catheters and implants, and that's a huge variety of market, right? All over the body, all different price ranges. And we have worked on pretty much every catheter you can probably think of, but we're not always the best manufacturing partner for those. So where we tend to specialize in manufacturing is the lower volume, high complexity devices. Think of complex cardiovascular implants or complex GI implants. We've been doing a lot of, those types of devices are a good fit for manufacturing. But the devices that are super high volume, very cost sensitive, those products are not a good fit for us in manufacturing. But we're good at the development, we're good at the testing and helping get customers through regulatory approval, and maybe even through pilot manufacturing, where we're supporting early stage, low volume manufacturing and putting together a good package for you to take to another contract manufacturing group that can produce it at higher volumes and a lower price, that's better for that market. So those would be urology type of devices, for example.
Yeah, for sure. So before we hop off the RFQ section, talking about, readiness and all that stuff, I'm just curious if you have any horror stories or really head scratcher instances where a client brings you a product or some, sketches on a napkin and you're like, whoa, this is wild. I don't know where they dreamt of this concept, but there's no way we could make this. Like anything that's just kind of been, that you can remark on as either funny or mind-blowing.
Yeah, we get some pretty crazy stuff from customers, like you said, napkin drawings or, 70-page patents we've got to scroll through and then wanting to us to figure out a design out of their patent. So we get some pretty crazy stuff, but, it's all fun. It's all R&D. I think we truly enjoy working on the R&D stuff. So it's always entertaining to see what we get from different customers.
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, and, quick plug, the playbook, the EXO playbook, one of the lessons in there, we have a RFQ kind of readiness checklist, but some of the core components of that, like just have a nice, clean, simple deck, prints, CAD drawings. That deck should have a forecast in it. You should think about packaging, material, bill of materials, all that stuff. Like, it's really not rocket science, but it's such a foreign, it's an art and a science, and it's just not something that's like really taught that many places. You just have to kind of go through it. But yeah, it is super important because like, I feel like maybe I'm wrong here, but I feel like when you are really prepared and you are kind of personable and seem like you'd be a fun person to work with, like, you are going to get a lot more flexibility out of, potential partners. I don't know if, I don't want anyone listening to hold you to that, but what are your thoughts on that? Would you agree, disagree?
Yeah, 100%. No, I love the RFQ resource you guys have. When I joined the playbook, I looked through that and I was like, oh my gosh, if every customer gave me this slide deck, that would be amazing. And it really does show that you're prepared, you're organized, you know what you need. And that does communicate a better story, and you're more likely to get attention and be taken seriously. Because I think a lot of times as startups, you're kind of fighting for attention with contract design and manufacturing groups. And if you can clearly communicate what you're doing, what your needs are, that's going to go so far. And one thing in that RFQ deck that you guys have, I love that you highlight that customers should share their challenges and their pain points. I think that's something that we don't always think of sharing, and it's something that's really easy to shy away from. You want to paint a pretty picture like, hey, we're ready to go and we have this beautiful device and it works perfectly. But in reality, that's going to hurt you in the long run. It's super important to communicate specifics of what your pain points are, what your biggest challenges are. We're struggling with this aspect design of the device, or we have this very small, complex, intricate part that has to be machined that's, very difficult. And it's important that you guys know about this part going into things. I think that's one part of the RFQ slide deck that you guys have that I think hardly any customers share with us, that I wish pretty much every customer did.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's, if you've got like, hey, this tolerance is the tightest thing we have, or this component is the hardest to machine, and it's going to take, 5-axis, 3D machining. Like, knowing that on the front end, you can kind of attack that first, and so that you don't waste a ton of time putting this quote together, and then he's like, oh, I wish they would have called this out before, because we either do or don't do that, right? Or this is going to be something, right? So it's just super helpful information to have on the front end. And I kind of think that leads into expectation setting, where being clear about what your expectations are, whether it's timelines or, hey, we need you to do these things, we need you to support these things, and we need you to be able to hand off to XYZ other partner. I don't know if you have any thoughts on kind of that expectation setting, but like, I feel like some people probably come to you guys and are like expecting you guys to do everything. And that's just not how it goes.
Yeah. Real quick on the challenges too, that helps kind of set those expectations and understand if the contract design and manufacturing group really does understand what you're working on. And, because if that's your most complex part and they start spitballing some ideas, then you're in good hands. They know what they're doing, and they're going to be able to handle those challenges. And that, I think that's really important too, is kind of vetting those contract groups to make sure that they have the right experience in there. They're not fluffing things up and just over-promising and telling you they can do everything. But yeah, so I think setting expectations is huge. I feel like that's probably the main theme of working with contract manufacturing groups, is setting expectations together and understanding, what really your needs are and communicating that clearly, setting the expectations of, again, like we talked about, your budget and your business requirements. Do you have budget constraints? Do you have milestones that you need to hit? Do you have an animal study scheduled for next month that you need prototypes for? Communicating openly, honestly, transparently, and really setting all those expectations is huge. And I think that's the number one thing that sets you up for success in those partnerships.
Yeah, no doubt. One thing, after you've gone through your quote process and maybe you've talked to a good number of vendors, you find who you like, capability match, culture match, price match, right? One thing I always recommend doing is getting kind of like your point of contact list from them, and then making sure that you understand, like, hey, if I've got a question about machining, I go to this person. If I have a question about packaging validation, I need to talk to this person. If I have a question about, how we're going to handle this, quality DHF related thing, who am I talking to? Because a lot of the times you'll kind of interface initially and build a relationship with kind of the business development person or the salesperson, and then you're kind of very quickly jettisoned into this different kind of project management and team structure. Some of my favorite groups I've ever had to work with, like as soon as you made that transition, they're like emailed you the contact list and kind of what they were in charge of specific to your project. Like, there's some packaging groups that are like, yep, so this is your project manager, here's your process engineer, here's your labeling engineer, and here's your sterilization scientist. Like, exactly if you have a question, like which one you need to go to. That way you're not ping-ponging around people. How does Medical Murray, how do you guys approach kind of putting a team around things? I know it's probably a little bit different for every project, but kind of what's y'all's philosophy on kind of putting a team around a project?
Yeah, we do the same thing. We start off the project with a team member list, so you know exactly who to go for each item, each resource. Typically, you're right, it does vary depending on the project, whether it's a small prototyping effort or a large multi-year development program. It's always going to have a project manager and a lead engineer. And then from there, kind of depends on the project needs. There'll be more engineers supporting There'll be engineers and technicians supporting as well for builds and testing. But that project manager and lead engineer is always going to be the core structure of our projects.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. And just having worked with, I think, Medical Murray before, like I have gone through the quote process with you guys, and the clarity with which you guys lay things out is just like admirable. And you feel like you know exactly what you're signing up for. And, I think y'all do a great job at it. So I'll get off. I'll quit beating that drum on Medical Murray. I think you guys do awesome work.
Yeah, I think that's important. Like we try to be really transparent, probably maybe too transparent and too honest. So, we're not going to promise the cheapest project or the fastest delivery time, but we're going to be honest about it. I think our customers find value in that, so it's good to hear reassurance.
Yeah. No, and to that point, I don't know if we've talked about this before, but if it's a critical supplier, like you should at least have 3, if not 6 quotes. I feel like there's this bell curve of, you've got most expensive, least expensive, and like there's kind of like a correlative other bell curve of like level of service and quality. And you really don't want the cheapest price usually, because you're going to get like they're cutting corners somewhere, right? So I've always found like if you can kind of find that middle ground, maybe it's kind of that left half, right, of the between that midpoint and a bell curve, where it's like, hey, I feel like I'm getting good pricing, this supports our business case on the margins that we need, but I'm also not scraping the bottom of the barrel. I like the team, they're well equipped. So I really think it's a fine line. And I've seen projects blow up because they tried to go with this group that, promised the moon and gave them really good pricing. And then it's a 26-week lead time for the first set of prototypes or something. And it's, there's an excuse here and an excuse there. Like, how much did that cost you, right? Like, how much time, maybe the cash or maybe the quality of these prototypes was so bad you can't even use them for testing. So yeah, it's a big watch out. When you're getting engaged with a critical supplier, it is like a marriage, right? So you want to build a high quality, long-lasting relationship. When you need to tweak payment terms or maybe to amortize something or whatever it is, right, you need to be able to rely on them. So what are some tips and tricks for cultivating, really high-quality, long-lasting relationships with suppliers?
So you're right, it is a marriage. You're going to go through challenges together. You're going to go through highs and lows together, and it's important that you're in it together. And I think that idea of mutual partnership is really important, because you both need to feel like you're helping each other succeed and you want to see each other succeed, right? Because, the startup success is the contract manufacturer's success and vice versa. So I think, as much as you can try to really build that mutual partnership and try to feel out that mutual partnership during the RFQ process, it's a little challenging, but visit, ask for references, try to talk to as many people as you can. Don't just talk to business development. Ask to talk to the engineers, ask to talk to the quality group, ask to talk to the different teams so that you can kind of try to get a feel for the company as a whole and see if you see yourself building that mutual partnership together. And yeah, like I said, just honesty and transparency, I think, is huge. Being able to set expectations together, discuss timelines and budgets together openly, those kinds of things are what I think shows you have an honest and transparent group. If during the quoting process they're willing to break down the budget with you and go through it with you and discuss ways that, maybe we could adjust the budget to help you out or, adjust your budget because of your cash flow restraints or whatever it may be, or your funding cycles, groups that are willing to work with you on those types of things and be honest and transparent with you through the quoting process, I find that is going to be maintained throughout the lifetime of your relationship as well.
Yeah. Amen. You took the words out of my mouth when you were talking, like out of my head when you were talking about go visit. Like, I think on-site visits are huge for relationship building. You get to see, oh, okay, here's where the operators are going to sit. Here's the clean room. Like, oh, okay. And like, you can really start, to understand the process a little bit better. I think it helps quality a ton when you're really kind of laying eyes on it and you're trying to think about processes and workflows and different things like that. But I totally agree on that. I also, the funding cycles thing, and that was such a great comment. I feel like some founders, especially if they're the ones that are in charge of fundraising, like they don't want to tell people that they're struggling fundraising, but like it happens. Like it fundraising barely ever goes faster than you think it will. So like, I totally agree. Just be like, hey, like we would love to take the next step in this project or even start this project, but like we got this funding cycle, we're waiting on this investor, we're negotiating a term sheet, whatever, we can't do it right now. Like that goes a long way.
It goes so far. It's so huge because also weed out contract manufacturing groups that don't truly want to work with startups.
Yeah.
Because if they're not willing to hear that and have that discussion with you, then they're really not going to give you the time of day. If they're willing to hear it and go, yeah, no worries, what do you need? I'm happy to, provide a draft budget or a draft proposal or whatever you need to help support your fundraising efforts. Those types of groups will understand it and be willing to work with you through it. And I think that's a good way to make sure the groups want to work with startups also.
Totally. I mean, I asked that question, and I recommend people ask that question, like, do you work with other startups? Can you support some packaging validation adoption? If you ask that question and you're getting some like head scratching and they're, and then you ask them about startups and they're like, yeah, we're trying to lean more into that. And they haven't done it before. Like, it can be rough.
Yeah.
And I've actually, I've gotten better about this, but I still sometimes feel a little weird about it. You're going through a quote process. You've got a project. You're reaching out to a lot of different people and you're like, hey, you're trying to, win them over, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a bunch of quotes and then they're doing their job. They're following up and like, hey, where do we stand on this project, right? Do you still need these things?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I don't want to tell them that I'm not, right?
Yeah.
Personally, I've just taken the approach of just being like, hey, this group, they had a better price or they had a better lead time. We really enjoyed it and appreciate all the energy and effort. What would your words of wisdom be to founders? Kind of what does it mean to you when you get specific types of responses in those situations?
Yeah. First off, we know you're searching, right? That's part of the process and you should be. You should be reaching out to 3+ groups and making sure you find the right partner. And if we're not the right partner, I won't take any offense to that. We've got a small world especially in the cardiovascular space. So chances are we'll run into each other. There may be a project we can work on again in the future together. Maintain the relationship. And the best way to do that is just exactly what you said. Send a quick email that says, thanks so much for your time. We went with this other group for XYZ reasons. Please stay in touch. We'll reach out. Because a lot of times too, you may get a month into your relationship with that group and it doesn't work out. And then you've got to start your search over again or reach back out to the groups. And if you've been ghosting them for a month or 2 or 6, it may not be as easy to open that conversation back up. But yeah, just be honest, be open. Again, the transparency and communicate it. I think it goes a long way. And honestly, that's how we get better too. If we're consistently hearing, hey, your lead times are way too long, then that's a good way for us to take a look and say, okay, what do we, clearly we're having this consistent feedback from our customers. How do we improve on that? So yeah, I think the transparency is always great.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, if I was in, your position, I would absolutely want to know, hey, we didn't win the business. That's great. Can you tell me why? Because you guys are trying to improve too.
Yeah.
And I think just to call back to an earlier point about the expectations too, there's many ways to do a project, to quote a project, to execute it, right? Do you care more about lead times? Do you care more about price, right? Do you care more about, speed to market overall? And, how are you balancing those things? Because I know how it is, right? When you're staffing folks and putting hours on projects and things, you've got to kind of pick and choose. It's am I going to dump all this effort and energy and then stick with them with a big bill? Or are they really worried about cost of goods more than lead times and speed to market? And we got to really focus on that. Any thoughts on that piece?
Yeah, we have customers that do have focus on one or the other, and communicating that is so essential because you're right. It's easy to focus on the timeline and, we have to hit this deadline. We have an animal study coming up next week. We have to have these prototypes ready for the animal study. Do anything you can to make it happen. And does that truly mean do anything we can? Are we paying expedites? Are we sending these to the sterilization facility and paying double expedite for it and expedite shipping both ways? Is it truly the schedule is most important, or are there budget constraints within that? And then vice versa, maybe we're working within a very constricted budget and we need to know, hey, we have X amount of funding. It's grant funding, so we don't have a penny more to spend. And, we got to see what we can do within that funding. And a lot of times there's a schedule involved with the grant funding as well. But, that is more of a constraint than the timeline oftentimes. So yeah, communicating your most important needs, your most important milestones, your most important constraints is a huge way to set those expectations and set the project up for success.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. So one of the last topics I want to get to is just common mistakes, right? Common missteps that you see that founders are going through the RFQ process and they just get wrong or it causes them some heartburn. Kind of take it anywhere you want. Any missteps or watch outs for founders out there engaging in the RFQ process?
Yeah, I think we've touched on a few. I think the most common I probably see is not aligning that on expectations. So, we build prototypes and they're proof of concept prototypes, and, they were expecting to be able to use them in a cadaver lab.
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't the intended function of the prototypes. And it seems so simple, but it's very easy if you're not aligned on those expectations to go down that path. So I think that's a huge one. There's a lot of missteps, I think, around the vendor selection process. I think we've touched on a lot of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Visit the facilities, make sure that you ask questions and dig deep around their experience and their capabilities and their expertise. When you visit a facility, make sure you're looking in the clean rooms for all of the equipment that is needed to build your device and build your product. And just kind of really dig deep on the technology and the experience, as well as, the relationship. We talked about communicating kind of your challenges or your pitfalls or your pain points. I think that is huge, and that can lead to a lot of issues if those things aren't openly communicated, and then it leads to bigger problems down the road when you run into these issues that weren't communicated, and then you've got, you're over budget, over schedule because you spend 2 months dealing with whatever issue that wasn't openly communicated. Yeah. I mean, in general, I think that's a huge one. Is R&D is challenging, and there will be issues. There's going to be unforeseen challenges that come up, and you're going to have to be prepared to overcome those, right? So you need the budget runway and the schedule runway and a buffer to be able to overcome those challenges. And we always build in a little bit because we know it's coming, but there can always be more. There can always be more challenges. And I think the founders have to be prepared with bandwidth, funds, schedule, all the above to survive and to survive those challenges, and know that that's just part of R&D. It's pretty, it's a lot of times unavoidable.
Yeah. No, for sure. One big kind of mistake, and I guess this would be a little bit RFQ, but more just kind of getting into the execution. But you see a lot of people try to make a fully functional device right out of the gate, or they'll try to use kind of high fidelity, like production level materials or processes to do that. And I am just very much in the camp of isolate what is the hardest to make, highest risk element of your device and see if you can make that kind of in a chamber, right? Like isolate it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's even larger than scale, right? Or maybe you kind of hack and harvest, taking some off the shelf components from or getting some stuff from chamfer, literally sawing through devices. I'm just curious, how do you approach kind of that initial, really jumping from concept to prototype, phase, and what strategies you guys take?
Yeah. I mean, I think it does depend on if you're proof of concept versus first prototypes versus trying to get into that, first real prototypes. And so, I mean, we're constantly hacking up devices and buying used product or expired product and trying to apply it to new devices or new technologies. That's one of the most cost-effective ways, I think, to prototype. Or buying components and sub-assemblies from chamfer or other off-the-shelf components and retrofitting them to make it work for what you're trying to do. That's a huge thing and a great resource. I think that sometimes where we run into challenges with that is if we have a clinician inventor that's expecting the prototypes to look really pretty and look like a commercial device, but they're really just proof of concept prototypes. That's again with the aligning on expectations and what the prototypes are going to look like, act like, feel like, how they're going to perform, and what the focus is of the prototyping efforts.
Yeah, like two really quick stories. I was going through an accelerator and spent a bunch of money trying to get, 3D printed prototypes and these other kind of high fidelity. And it was like, yeah, this is exactly what it's going to look like and everything. And we were just not getting it done. And especially when you have parts where there's kind of, your modulus of elasticity or there's a living hinge or things like that, it really is important. The material can make a big difference and sometimes 3D printing can't do it. But what we ended up doing as we were approaching demo day, we literally got some parts from Cosina and went and got a small PVC pipe from Home Depot and basically hacked this device together. But it was 95% fully functional, even though it looked a little Frankenstein. And took that to demo day. And within 5 or 6 months, I think within 5 months, we had raised almost $1 million for around that company. So that's just a testament to if you can sell them on the functionality, I think people understand the aesthetics is easier to figure out, right, than the functionality.
Yes. Yeah.
Anything that you want to share kind of with the audience out there, it could be a saying, it could be a movie quote, anything.
I have one more hot topic, actually.
Let's go.
A little bit hard to discuss, but I think part of the like sharing business strategy, not strategy, but business essentials, I guess, during the RFQ process is sharing your COGS targets.
Mm-hmm.
And I know startups and founders don't want to do that. They don't want to maybe pigeonhole themselves into pricing, which I totally understand. I understand the first person to speak in negotiations loses and whatever it may be. But the startup should have a deep understanding of the market and a viable price. And the contract manufacturing group is probably not going to have that level of deep understanding. They'll have some understanding and some range, but the startup will know best what their true COGS targets are. And I think that needs to be shared with us from the beginning. And you'll see the experienced groups share this immediately.
Yeah.
They share their COGS targets because it needs to guide development. We need to come out of development with a product that's sellable and profitable and viable for both groups, right? So it has to be market price viable for the startup, and it has to be a COGS price for the contract manufacturing group that allows them to make some money too. We're a business also. So we also got to survive. But, sharing upfront those COGS targets, I think, is huge to guide development, and make sure you come out of development with a product that's viable for your business. But I know that's a hot topic and it's hard to share, and it's something that people really shy away from.
Yeah, no, it really, really is. I mean, I've not done it much, but if I get asked, it's like, and I think, there's ways to do it, right? Like you could say, hey, this industry is like, they expect a 60% or an 80% margin. So we're planning on pricing it at this. And, so we need it to be here. I think some founders think that they're kind of pulling the wool over people's eyes, and it's like, oh, like we can't tell them we're going to sell this for $2,000 and then ask them to make it for like 500. It's like, yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Because we all understand that's what's happening.
Exactly. Yeah. We understand, what percent we need to make and what percent you guys need to make for everyone to have a healthy, successful business. And, you're not going to surprise us with your target COGS most likely, because again, we probably know the range. We know the range of what's acceptable, and your price is probably going to be on somewhere on the lower end of that range. Most likely, a lot of the time you're trying to create a product that, on the lower end of the price range to get a little bit more, to make it more sales effective or, sales attractive.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get it. But yeah, you're probably not going to surprise us. And I think it's huge to share so that, our engineering teams deeply understand it too, because we may come up with a super cool design that's got a laser cut nitinol frame and it's, super flexible and kink resistant, but it's a laser cut nitinol frame and your target COGS is $20 a device, and it's just not viable in any world. So, sharing those things is so critical to guiding the design process.
Laser cut nitinol, that's pretty cheap, isn't it? I would imagine.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. No, but and I think too, like you talked about transparency, and I feel like a lot of contract manufacturers, they would love to be able to say, hey, you gave us this COGS target, we actually came in like 5 cents cheaper. I think a lot of people, especially if you've been operating in good faith and they're committed to you, you're committed to them, like they would love to be able to do that, because like you're still going to work in and have a margin for your business, right? And everybody likes kind of, being the hero and being able to say, hey, we beat our goal, right? We beat our target. I think a lot of founders think that like whatever they tell the contract manufacturing group for their COGS target, like it's never going to be lower than that, right? And I really don't think that's the case. Of course, there's probably shops that like may take that approach, right. But I think as you get more into this, kind of from the founder side, and like you understand like, hey, like this is what these things just cost, right? And then there's parts of a COGS breakdown when you ask for it where you'll be able to say like, yeah, I understand where kind of everything's coming from. And just, again, that transparency is really, really key.
For sure.
So wrapping it up here, Sam, what do you want to plug? Where can we find you? We can put your socials down in the show notes below, where can we find you? What do you want to plug?
Cool. Yeah. LinkedIn will be, I guess, posted in the comments. Check out Medical Murray's website, just medicalmurray.com, medical Murray. We are a contract design manufacturing group, and we focus on cardiovascular devices, or more catheters and implants, I guess. But we love working with startups, and we love to help you guys out. So check us out. And to be honest, I'm always transparent if we're not a good fit, but I usually have a good resource to point you towards, a good direction to point you. So you can always reach out to me and I can point you in the right direction if we're not the right fit.
Yeah, ditto to that. The folks at Medical Murray, they do great work and they're also very helpful and well connected. So like, absolutely +1 to that. They can put you in the right direction, even if they're not the right group, but I bet they would be. So with that, we'll wrap it up. Sam, this was so fun. I think there's a ton of nuggets in here that are going to help founders be better at going through the RFQ process and building better, high quality relationships with their suppliers. So really, really appreciate you taking out the time today to hop on the pod.
Yeah.
And until next time.
Yeah, thanks, Spencer. Happy to be here and appreciate your time.
Yep. All right. See you, everybody.